Welcome to Line Change, a podcast about hockey, social issues, and change makers in the game we love. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy. Welcome to Line Change. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy, and today we are talking to one of the greatest athletes to ever come out of Canada, baseball player and Hall of Famer, Fergie Jenkins. Fergie and I have got to know each other over the last couple of years. He was a major figure in my book, On Account of Darkness, Shining Light on Race and Sport, where his story is told at length. While most people remember Ferguson Jenkins as an all-star pitcher, Cy Young winner, the accolades go on and on. Ferguson's first love was actually the game of hockey. When Willie O'Ree was breaking barriers, Ferguson Jenkins was a young man in the stands, seeing himself portrayed on the ice and represented, and it made him want to be a National Hockey League player. Fortunately for the baseball world, Fergie then saw a man named Larry Doby, the second ever black man to play Major League Baseball. Doby was an inspiration to Jenkins, who from that day on, watching Doby play against the Detroit Tigers, he decided he was going to be a baseball player. This is Fergie's story. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy, and welcome to Line Change. Thanks for joining me, Fergie. I'm here with Ferguson Jenkins, who is a member of the Baseball Hall of Fame, the first ever Canadian inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, Cy Young winner, Order of Canada member, four-time Canadian Athlete of the Year winning the Lou Marsh Award, and recently had a statue of his likeness unveiled outside of Wrigley Field in Chicago, where he obviously starred in the Major League Baseball with the Chicago Cubs. I myself first met Fergie about a decade ago when he was having his likeness unveiled on a Canada Post stamp. And since then, I've had the honor of interviewing him for my book, On Account of Darkness, Shining Light on Race and Sport. And Fergie, of course, is a much known or very well-known baseball player. But to a lesser-known fact, Fergie was also quite a good hockey player. And that's kind of what I want to start talking to you today about, Fergie. So maybe you can tell people that might know Fergie Jenkins only as a baseball player a little bit about your hockey playing.
My dad got me skates when I was like 4 years old, and I played in some of the lower leagues, Pee-wee, Bantam, Midget, Juvenile, and in the Chatham area, we had an OHA team when in 1960, and they were the Chatham Maroons, and every kid that grew up wanted to play junior B hockey for the Chatham Junior Maroons. And I tried out for the team. I didn't make the team, but had the opportunity to display what my hockey ability was all about.
I think it's something that, a lot of people don't think about back then, especially, as a person of color, there weren't a lot of black hockey players at the time. Now, one time you told me a story about seeing Willie O'Ree play. I'm wondering if you can tell us about that.
I was 15 years old, and the Boston Bruins were having a spring training game in London, Ontario, against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And my dad took me to London and said, if you really want to understand that playing hockey is not for everyone, but Willie O'Ree was one of the first players of color to be with that Boston team. And my dad took me the opportunity to see him play. And for 3 periods, he really played well. He was an excellent skater, didn't score any points, but showed what his ability was all about. My dad gave me that opportunity to see a player of color play. And it kind of incited me to maybe to play the game of hockey. And it worked out. I think in some respect, the ability to play the game with the balance and shooting ability and skating ability was something that I really enjoyed doing when I was younger.
It's so fantastic that that piece of history is there, because I think the representation of seeing, a black NHL player at that time, and Willie O'Ree is really amazing. But as the story goes, of course, you did not go the hockey route. And as you told me once, that a little bit of that has to do with another game that your dad took you to, which was seeing a baseball player named Larry Doby, who was the second ever black player in Major League Baseball. Only 3 months after Jackie Robinson made his appearance, Doby made his. And of course, you saw him many years later, but maybe you can tell us about that time where you saw that, maybe I want to play baseball instead of hockey.
Well, yeah, my father was into a lot of sports, and he played in the Negro League and for the Chatham Coloured All-Stars. And he took me to Briggs Stadium in Detroit, and I got the opportunity to see Larry Doby hit. He was playing center field at the time, hit 2 home runs in Tiger Stadium, and the fans cheered him. And that was kind of unusual for a visiting team to come in and have a player play as well and to perform that well, hit 2 home runs. And the fans really gave him a standing ovation when he hit his second home run. And he was a good, talented athlete. He could steal bases, had a great arm, and he displayed a lot of power. And he was a left-hand hitter, so hitting the ball to right field, and that was a short porch in old Briggs Stadium. So he was able to hit 2 home runs there. And I kind of said to myself, I said, maybe I want to be a ball player. And I don't think my dad really took it to heart until Gene DeJura showed up in my hometown, and he took me under his wing, and he kind of changed my mind about being a first baseman, about maybe I should try to pitch. And 2 summers and part of a winter, we practiced, worked out at local gymnasium, and lo and behold, at the age of 17, some scouts started coming to my hometown, and I think it was Detroit, maybe Pittsburgh, Boston, because Detroit was so close. The Tigers were real close. But Gene DeJura was working with the Phillies, and he was a Philly scout. He got Tony Lucadello to come take a look at me, and when I graduated high school in '62, I signed a pro contract with the Phillies.
I think I remember a story about one of those tryouts. I believe it was the Tigers coming to Chatham to watch yourself and at least one other ball player work out. And as I understand, that ball player was a Wakabayashi brother. And
well, Melvin Wakabayashi was there, Dennis Roebuck. There were quite a few of us in that era. We had some really, really good ball clubs. I think we won 1 or 2 OBA championships, one with Bantam and the other one with Midget. And there were some talented players there. And, I just think that the scouts knew what they were doing by coming there. I know that the Detroit Tigers really looking at Dennis Roebuck was 6'4", 6'5", threw the ball really good. He was a really good athlete. And the competition of back then in the 60s was pretty high. And there were not a lot of Canadian athletes getting signed to pro contracts. I think, and I hope I can get the name right. Johnny Upham signed, being from Windsor. Reno Bertoia signed with the Detroit Tigers. But Johnny Upham signed earlier with the Philadelphia Phillies before I did.
Our hometown area, we're both from Chatham, just in case anyone that's listening doesn't know that. But there are a lot of great athletes. And I brought up Mel Wakabayashi because, of course, he chose to go the opposite direction and stuck with hockey, a great hockey player with those Chatham Maroons, went on to play NCAA hockey with Michigan University, where he was also an All-American in baseball. So really some incredible people. He later coached the Japanese national team at the Olympic Games in Lake Placid. And so there's, a lot of really incredible talent and diverse talent that's come out of our area. And that's just something that I don't think a lot of people know. Now, you mentioned earlier, and we've talked a little bit here about your dad. And of course, I want to talk about the baseball part of this a little bit. And your dad, played for the Well, in the 1930s for the Chatham Coloured All-Stars baseball team, who in 1934 won the All-Ontario Championship, becoming the first ever all-black baseball team to do that. Recently, they were inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, given the Order of Sport. So they're kind of sitting there alongside you. Just this team that's had an incredible amount of recognition. And I think it's so interesting that Ferguson Jenkins Sr. was on this historic team. So I'm wondering, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your dad and about that All-Stars team.
Well, my dad came to Chatham, I think in 1934 or 35, and had an opportunity to play with Flat Chase, I think Cliff Obie, the Harding brothers, the Talbot brothers, or Ben and Ross Talbot. But I think he got more opportunity to play. I think it was like 37 or 38. He got me into the game of baseball because of the fact that he really loved the game. And I never had the opportunity to see my father play, but just individual stories that were told to me from different people that my dad was a center fielder. He was left-handed, and he hit left-handed, and he had pretty good speed in the outfield, and carried himself pretty good as a ball player.
Yeah, of course, that team, a lot of the recognition now, people continue to say that many of those players might have had major league abilities. One of the players on that team, which you mentioned, the brothers, Wilford Boomer Harding, was also a great hockey player. Of course, he broke the color barrier at Detroit's Olympia Stadium. The famous story goes that in 1944, he went there to public skate, was turned away by the attendant at the edge of the ice, saying that public meant white only. But 2 years later, signed with the Windsor Staffords and became the first ever black man to play a hockey game at Olympia Stadium. So, and in the IHL, which is really incredible. And that team, the Chatham Coloured All-Stars, of course, had many barriers. They faced a lot of racism at the field. Sometimes, as the stories goes, they almost had to fight their way out of town. I know that when you were in Chatham, you didn't have a lot of that. You didn't face a lot of negativity growing up. But as soon as you crossed the border and went to play in, Miami and Arkansas and Chattanooga, you did. And a lot of what I talk about on this show is social issues. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just tell people about some of the things you had to go through to become a Hall of Famer, because I think a lot of people just think, oh, Fergie was a fantastically talented athlete. He had it easy, but you didn't really. I mean, you didn't have it easy at all once you got into the States and the minor leagues, maybe once you made it to the majors, but those minor leagues were not, there was a lot of racism you faced. And I'm hoping you can just share a little bit about that.
Well, the early 60s is when I signed with the Phillies in 62. And I started my career in Miami with the Miami Marlins. And there were 4 players of color on that team: Alex Johnson, Reno Garcia, a kid named Swanson, and myself. And when we went on the road to go to the different cities like St. Pete or Tampa or Sarasota, if we stopped somewhere, we'd have to give basically our money to the players, the white players on the team, and they would bring us food back, and we could eat on the bus. There were some other occasions where we'd get off the bus, but we were able to maybe go around the back or into the kitchen and be served that in that manner. The one story I think I told you, I think it could have been Tampa. We stayed in a brothel, and then in St. Pete we stayed in a funeral home, where the funeral home and the brothel were owned by black employers. And we stayed in some of the rooming areas that they had in these buildings. And I can recall Alex Johnson, when we stayed in the funeral home in St. Pete, he would not go to sleep. I think where they take care of the bodies is in the basement. The second floor is where all the caskets and the showroom is. And on the third floor, they had bedrooms for the players. And Alex, after a ball game, he said, "Romy, I'm not going to sleep." So he slept he sat in a chair. I think he ended up going to sleep, but he wouldn't go in the bed. But Alex was quite a guy. He was from Detroit, Michigan, too. He was a very popular ball player, and he was a cut up sometimes. He'd say a few things, and I look at him and I go, "Alex, you really don't believe that to me?" And he says, "Oh, I stand by what I said." and he was quite an individual, a really good ball player. We played together in Chattanooga and also in Little Rock. We came to the Philly organization. Quite a guy.
Yeah. Yeah, so you went to a lot of these major cities afterwards. Once you made it to the majors, of course, you said that many of the things that you faced kind of either didn't make it to you because the teams were better managed and everyone stayed in the same places, or maybe times were just changing. Hopefully, now, did you ever, as you were in Chicago or Philadelphia, did you ever still watch hockey or follow any teams?
Yeah, I think what was nice is when I got an opportunity to be in Chicago, I got introduced to Pierre Palat, Bobby Hull, I think Esposito, the older brother, Phil Esposito, and a few of the players that were on that team at the time. And our traveling secretary, Blake Cullen, always made sure if we had an off day and we could maybe see a hockey game or a football game, when the Bears were there too, we'd have that opportunity to see other sports. But what was nice is when I got traded to Boston, I got a chance to meet Bobby Orr, go to the stadium there in Boston, and see some players that were Canadian at the time, and to see how good they were in their chosen sport. But so it was a lot of fun seeing other athletes that were Canadians really do well.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wrote about your story, your hockey story for the Hockey News, which was really interesting because, as I said, I don't think a lot of people think at that time in particular that Fergie Jenkins was also a hockey player. But I heard that you used to, when you'd come back to Chatham, Kent in the winters, sometimes you'd still play in the Industrial League and things like that. What did you enjoy about the game so much that kept you doing it even after you were, playing professional baseball?
Well, I think a lot of the individuals that were still in Chatham were guys that I went to school with. And there were a few guys that got an opportunity to play hockey and came back and played in that Industrial League. And it was a Saturday, Sunday league. They played in the mornings. And it just kept me in pretty good shape. What was nice is the one year I sponsored the team, we play about 30, 35 games during the winter, starting in, September. And I wouldn't join the team until I came back from playing baseball in October. So I had an opportunity to tell one of the owners of the team, I said, I'd like to sponsor the team because I knew some Blackhawk players. Gunzo was a sporting good store in the Chicago area, and I bought Blackhawk equipment, the pants, the shields that you wear, the socks, and the sweater. And I called the team the Circle J Hawks from the farm that I had there in Blenheim at the time, Circle J. And we ended up winning like 25 to 30 games and won the championship. And we're really, I think, a team that was to be reckoned with because we had tryouts. And the guys that made the ball club or the hockey team really were good hockey players. And we were kind of the standouts of the league that one particular year. It could have been, and I'm not mistaken, it could have been maybe 81 or 82 when I sponsored the team.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That strangely enough, I drive by your former farm almost every day, and I think about it every time that I do. That's where you were, and of course lived there for part of your lifetime, and that's an interesting thing for me to just see and think about. But between hockey and baseball, you've had quite the sporting career. I can't imagine if you were starting out today, that young hockey player, and a scout came to the rink and they see this 6'5" athletic, whether or not I know you were kind of lanky at the time, perhaps before
Yeah,
you
right.
got there. But yeah, I think I can't imagine that there wouldn't have been interest, because nowadays it seems like that if you had said there's a 6'5" multi-sport athlete defenseman that's out there, uh, who knows? Maybe things would have went differently. Do you ever think about if you were going back through it now, what you would have done? I'm sure you still would have chosen baseball, but is it something that you've ever considered?
Well, at the age of probably 17, 18 years old, a lot of players were getting noticed by, NHL ball clubs or hockey teams, excuse me. And, getting an opportunity to sign and having that opportunity to work, I think, a little more at your craft, I could have probably been a maybe better defenseman, maybe shooting the puck or clearing the puck, things like that. And I think it really helped because of the fact that skating was a balance sport for me. Uh, and being a hand-eye coordination with the puck, carrying the puck, shooting the puck, and then taking hits were part of the game too. A lot of times, especially going in the corners. In the '60s, you had to skate to touch the puck for icing, and a lot of times it took speed to get back past the red line, then the other blue line, the goal line, to try to get to that puck, so that it would be called, maybe not icing, or it was called icing, but you still had to touch that puck on the defense part of it. And there'd be a few times I took some hits. It let me know what those boards were all about. See, back then the boards were made out of wood, not plastic the way they are now, and they give.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those arenas didn't have the glass. It was chain link fence. Some of those old arenas, believe me, it was it was a little different.
I bet. Yeah, it's that going back into the corner was always part of the game that I was a little wary of too as a defenseman. That you always knew that you were going back there and you were going to take that hit. And
Yeah, because you got to have eyes in the back of your head. A lot of times you could feel that player on you, especially if he was close enough to you. And a lot of times if he wasn't, you knew something was going to happen. You're trying to get that puck one-handed a lot of times, and a lot of times it didn't work that way, and you took a hit.
and I remember, I think I read it in your book actually that you related your style to kind of like a Doug Harvey type player out on the ice. Was that a favorite player of yours at the time?
I watched so many games. The NHL hockey was always televised on Game of the Week. And the Canadians were always a feature. There was only 6 teams back then. So they would either play the Red Wings or Toronto or the New York Rangers. So Doug Harvey was an individual that, I don't know how many Stanley Cup rings and trophies he won, but he played on that team for quite a few years. And he had quite of a style of clearing the puck. And I just kind of watched that situation. And I think it kind of told me that if I could continue to skate and handle a puck similar to these guys that are already in the NHL, it could help me play in my leagues that I played in. So I tried to patent myself after a lot of things that Doug Harvey did.
Fergie, you are one of the greatest living Canadian athletes that there is, and you've done so much for the sport, so much for our community, and telling the story of the Chatham Coloured All-Stars, really helping them get the notoriety that team, including your father, deserved for so long. Why do you think, and this will be my last question for you today, why do you think telling that story of this team of all black baseball players that in the 1930s, nonetheless, that were playing in Canada and overcoming all those odds, why do you think keeping that story alive is so important for people nowadays?
Well, I think because of the fact that now a lot of those family members are still alive, and they still live in the Chatham, Dresden, Leamington area, that they do have games that they play in the summer months. Maybe it's not hardball; they play a lot of softball. But I think because of the fact that the Chatham Colored All-Stars are still on the ballot for the Canadian Hall of Fame. They They were on it again this past year, didn't get the required number of votes. But I think before too long, it could happen for that particular ball club. And it's always something that comes up because of the fact that so many of those good athletes were from that area. You know, a lot of the players end up moving from Windsor or Essex or Riverside and move to Chatham and form that particular ball club. When it's brought up a lot, people look, and it's been researched that a lot of these talented athletes from that area really played exceptional baseball well before Jackie Robinson and before Larry Doby. So I think it's part of history. It's part of being proud that maybe your father or your uncle played on that particular ball club, and we're part of that Chatham Coloured All-Stars back in the 30s.
Yeah, it is such an important part, and that's why I want to keep this portion of your history alive too, of talking about the fact that you were a hockey player at a time when not a lot of black hockey players were out there playing the game, and you were loving hockey long before that, even when you got to see Willie O'Ree, who was the first ever black hockey player to play in the National Hockey League. So I think that that's just such an important part of the conversation and a part of your history that I really hope to keep alive. So Fergie, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, and I think that hearing your story is so important for sports fans. I know that you're so beloved in Chicago and Philadelphia and across Canada, and I just appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Ian. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for joining me, and thank you for listening to my conversation with Fergie Jenkins, an amazing athlete on the ice and on the field. Ferguson's story of overcoming racism and seeing the representation of other athletes on the ice and field is motivation for us all to continue to break down barriers. Ideally, someday, when another young Fergie Jenkins comes to the rink, they'll see themselves welcomed, represented, and accepted in the game of hockey. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy. Thank you for joining me. This has been A Line Change.